Welcome to Northwest Tech Show. I'm Dave Duncan, and this is a show where we talk about technology and how a better understanding of it can help you have better outcomes at home, at work, and in your civic engagements. We're going to kick things off, as we like to do, with a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at Twit TV.
This is Twit.
Cyber threats, they can get scary. And when we hear more and more about them actually hitting public works and utilities, it get even scarier. In fact, a recent statement by Bill Gates says that one of the next disasters to hit us is actually bioterrorism. I want to add to that a list of cyber terrorism on the resources that we have. And I want to add to things like that. It may sound like a plot of a new movie, but according to Florida officials, someone broke into the computer system of a water treatment plant in Florida and tried to poison drinking water for Florida town with roughly 15,000 residents. Very interesting. Now, an unknown person remotely accessed the computer interface used to actually adjust the chemicals that treat drinking water for Oldsmar, a small city 16 miles northwest of Tampa. Now, the intruder changed the level of sodium hydroxide to 11,100 parts per million, a significant increase from the normal amount of 100 parts per million. Now, for those not familiar with sodium hydroxide, it's actually called lye. Now, it's used in small amounts to treat the acidity of water to actually remove metals. It's also the active ingredient in liquid drain cleaners. So at high levels, it's actually very toxic. Now, if gone undetected, the change in the solution to contain high levels would actually have raised the amount of chemical to toxic levels and potentially killed people. Now, both the FBI and Secret Service are investigating here, as well as the local authorities. The first signs of the attack and the hack occurred on a Friday morning, and that's when a plant operator actually noticed someone remotely accessing the system that controls the chemicals and other aspects of the water treatment process. And then around 1:30 that same day, the operator actually watched as someone remotely accessed the system. They could see the mouse on his screen moving around to various functions that controlled the treatment process. In fact, the unknown person then opened the function that controlled the sodium hydroxide input and increased it by 111-fold. The intrusion lasted for 3 to 5 minutes. In fact, the operator immediately changed the setting back to the standard 100 parts per million. Now, it takes 24 to 36 hours for treated water to hit the water supply system so that no poisonous water was actually released here. Now, I want to start the discussion on this. Should utilities really, or even other critical infrastructure systems and resources like that, be exposed to the internet? I want to throw it to you guys first. Curtis, I want to throw that to you.
Well, I think on the one hand, you can certainly make the argument that they should not be. On the other hand, there are some very real reasons that people do have them on the internet. Remote access by staff and engineers, remote access by consultants. So there are some very legitimate reasons to have this external access. The thing is, as we all know, if you're going to have something exposed to the internet at large, you need to have a heightened level of security on that connection. And heightened level of security was not something that seemed to be in play here. Now, I will say that Oldsmar is a very small town. We're talking about 15,000 people or so really small. I think the good piece of luck that happened here was that someone was watching the screens when the attack happened. Something that I'm sure they wouldn't tell you, but would be interesting to know, is just how much of the day no one's there at all. Now, the no one's there at all is why they want the internet access, but the idea that they have to count on a set of human eyes on the screen for critical redundancy is the sort of thing that, well, we'd like to think we were past in 2021.
Right. I agree. Yeah, I guess in this case, it was actually TeamViewer was the app used to remotely access the system. Now, this brings the next question, and Bam, I want to throw this to you. Why is TeamViewer on these systems? You have an operator sitting there, obviously, some of the day, and then you have a remote desktop or remote access application accessing a very critical system. That doesn't seem like the right configuration to me.
I would tend to agree. The first thought I had was rookie league mistake, right? The first thing your attackers scan for is, escalated privilege type of services. So they're scanning for VNC, RDP, SSH, Telnet even, God forbid that something even that old and insecure is still running. So this is exactly what attackers scan for. They do a sweep for something that's going to easily get them directly to escalated privilege. So the fact that this was directly exposed tells me that their security controls are lax at best. I doubt there was MFA enabled on these accounts. Now, there's probably reasons why they needed TeamViewer, so I'm not going to pretend to know their operational requirements, but there are ways to do what they did in a secure fashion, right? Remote access is a common requirement, especially to Curtis's point. If this is a small town, probably lightly staffed operational center, so you might need remote access in a pinch. There might be, emergency reasons. If that administrator falls asleep or God forbid something worse happens to them while they're sitting in that chair, you need to be able to quickly get access to things that control critical infrastructure. So definitely can see a reason why TeamViewer would be on, or some other very privileged remote access solution be on board there. But there are a lot of really good ways, really well-defined ways that they could have cookbooked or followed a simple recipe and said, here's the secure way of doing this. And they clearly didn't do that. And that's worrisome at best.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot of organizations, and a lot of them, just like you said, they use JIT admin access to machines. So, if you really, really, really need to get on the machine, you have to, authenticate yourself. You have to use systems like, you have to use your YubiKey for to make sure that they know who you are. You have to use MFA to make sure that you're logging in correctly. And of course, then they audit the system, everything that you do, and they limit what you can do depending on your persona or your role. So, having full access, remote access of the box seems like overprivileged to me. So they're definitely not following the zero trust model. And in fact, we'll get into the zero trust model in the next bite. But, that seems very strange to me that they were just giving complete access to the entire box. But, Curtis, I want to throw the last word to you. Like, I think that this particular thing, I mean, obviously it's a small plant, a small city. It's probably run by, the city, the local government. And, they probably have a small force, probably a very small IT department. And so they thought, like, no one's going to target us. We're going to keep this the way it is because it works. The question begs to differ, though, is maybe there needs to be some policies that go into effect even for small towns that say, hey, you got to audit your systems and you have to make sure you're following these things, because eventually something really bad's going to happen.
Well, after all the discussions that we have had during the recent years about the fact that we know hackers have become persistent in many of our critical infrastructure networks, the idea that they would have the lax security on this water system that they had is remarkable. And by lax security, let me give you a picture. What we know so far is that there was no firewall in place between the open internet and this water treatment plant. And the TeamViewer that they were using was using default credentials. So it really was as simple as doing a showdown scan and entering admin. That is just a horrible level of security. And to put it in perspective, I have better security on my bedroom television than they had on the water treatment system in Oldsmar, Florida. So should there be minimum requirements? Yes, there should be. In the same way there should be best practices and minimum requirements on electric utilities, whether we're talking about a large regional or a small rural co-op. We should have the same sort of things on natural gas distribution systems, on sanitary sewage treatment systems. If you're dealing with systems that can directly impact public health and safety, there should be minimum requirements for cybersecurity best practices. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm glad, very happy, that it was caught before any humans could be impacted. But this absolutely should be a wake-up call to utility operators across the country.
You're listening to Northwest Tech Show, and that was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Enterprise Tech 430 Utility Security with Lou Maresca, Kurt Franklin, and Brian McHenry. So yeah, this is the story's been kicking around for a while. It's, little details keep coming out. So this, I think, is a fairly complete, like 80% complete story here at this point. So it was a Florida city of 15,000 near Tampa, and they, with no firewall, they left TeamViewer, which is it's a common, easy to set up remote access tool for your PC or Mac, and it's often used by tech support people. It's just like a standalone program. You just double click on it and it's running, and ports open, and then the person can log in remotely and see what's going on your computer and fix it, and basically they can see your display and they can use your mouse and keyboard remotely. So that's essentially what it does, and it's, like I said, it's very quick and easy to set up. It's not really I don't think generally meant to be a long-term solution, and it certainly isn't anywhere near best practices. There are specific programs built into Windows to do the same thing. TeamViewer is nice because it's cross-platform and, again, very simple to use. And sometimes, we talk about the security versus convenience trade-off, and this is one of those. And this is something where also, one of the things we like to say is that you need to not have assets the value of which exceed the value of the protection you put into them. And so something that is controlling your water supply and vital to, large-scale human health. Like I said, this town was 15,000. I don't know if it only served that town or if it served a wider area. But in any case, that is definitely something where you can't just say, well, not very many people here, so we don't care if they, have lethal stuff thrown into their water. You still have to protect the water supply proportional to the value that it is worth to that community. In that it's not something you really make money from messing with. It's kind of at a lesser level. Like, you certainly wouldn't want to have, if you had no firewall and generic software with default credentials protecting, billions of dollars cash, that would be gone in about 15 minutes, if not sooner. But, this is something where it's an opportunity for mischief, and it may have just been someone just, goofing around. Like they said, you could, Shodan is a search engine for security professionals that can search the web for servers that respond in a certain way. So you can just say, show me all the TeamViewer applications that have open ports in this port range or in this state or, geographic region or whatever. And so it'd be very easy to find that. As I said, it had default credentials. While someone was watching it, they were seeing the mouse move around. And, so it was not a very studied attack. Who knows, maybe the person looked around, did some Google searches on some of the buzzwords they saw, and fiddled with things. Or maybe they just were fiddling with things blind just to see if they could get some sort of reaction, set off some alarms, or, make a little bit of news, which they certainly succeeded in that regard. But because of the potential for illness or death, I think the response they get is going to be a little more than they were hoping for. It's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes I think this really also kind of details again how much fear factor and theater all this thing is. Oh, we need more and more and more and more and more surveillance and more surveillance and more surveillance. And on top of that, and it seems like the more surveillance they engage in, where they're just looking at everybody, the less they see actual crimes. And you just don't have very much to show for it. For all this extra surveillance, it generates lots of stories where that surveillance was misused. And I can't think of any stories where it was like, oh, through all this, super surveillance we did, we stopped all these big things. In fact, the intelligence community a few years ago had to admit that, of a program they'd set up that was very sweeping in its illegal surveillance. They didn't really have any terrorist attacks to show for it that had been stopped. Everything that had been stopped was done through old-fashioned police work. Someone's walking along and they see suspicious wires and gizmos in a van, and and they call the police, and and they find a bomb or something. That's usually the kind of process. Or you're watching a guy who's known to be a suspicious person. You have lots of reasons that he's been human intelligence, people that he's interacted with, said, hey, this guy is up to something. And then they investigate. And then, yes, the state certainly has the tools to penetrate deeply into the security of everyone they have reason to target. Or I should say anyone they have reason to target, because they can penetrate deeply, but not widely. So the wide stuff where they're just scooping up everyone's phone calls and email contact lists and stuff like this, that doesn't tend to generate a lot of crime fighting power there. It's really just old-fashioned police work that usually does the trick. And then you have all these other tools to amplify that. So no matter what steps someone who actually is engaging in criminal behavior takes to protect their activities, once there is suspicion, they generally will be found out. Or certainly they can be found out by competent investigations. But again, very little is found by just generally sweeping everyone. And this is another example of that. If there's anything that you wanted general wide sweeping surveillance to pick up, it's someone logging into a water treatment plant that has never done that before and has no connection with the plant. There's no, they know what the employees' IP addresses are, and this isn't one of them. And it's like, oh, that's suspicious. Let's track that down. Even if they're bouncing a signal off something, and if you're watching the whole net, you can still see where a signal is coming from if you are looking properly. So it shows there's just enough surveillance to cause chilling of free speech, enough for malicious actors within companies or within the government to harass people, as they call, the security industry calls love int, where people with access to this kind of things, they keep an eye on their significant others, their girlfriends or boyfriends, or even just people that they have an interest in, maybe celebrities. So this is, that's not accomplishing. This is, love int is really just kind of a buzzword for something that is top to bottom an abuse, an illegal abuse of the powers that they have granted themselves. So, that's not accomplishing much. So here we have an example where really lax security by default causes problems. So that's another thing, is there seems to be a preference for cataloging and using flaws in security rather than helping patch them. Because, if your priority is to be able to intrude into anyone's system anywhere, preferably at scale, then you don't want to close security holes. You want to use them to, quote unquote, catch bad guys, because that's where all the, kind of high interest, high prestige comes from. Even though you'd really prefer your security community to be providing you with systems that are very rarely penetrated, there's no big stories like, global systems continue to not be penetrated, would not be a very good story. But, you say, someone hacked into something and they almost poisoned this water plant. I'm sure there's people rubbing their hands together going, oh, good, even more justification to expand our powers, while kind of overseeing that, the powers you've got, you haven't actually been using them to stop this sort of thing. So, if you're doing something and it doesn't work, keep doing more of it. That's kind of nuts. So I can see, and I think most people could see, where if you're the one who has access to these sorts of things, your natural inclination might be, well, the more and more and more I'm a good guy, and the more power I have, the better it is for everyone, because I'll look out for them. And in the process of that, people are more and more subject to your personal view of how things should be. Not in a legal sense, but just in a personal preference sense, that you can hassle those you don't like. It's like, say, if you don't like the protesters, you can say, well, let's spend a lot of time surveilling the protesters and, see if we can catch them jaywalking or whatever, and give them a hard time, and not see that, what you're doing is more of a threat to our country than someone protesting. Seems like. Anyway. There were, one of the things I think that we should take away from is there are more secure ways. Remote access is something that hugely amplifies the ability to apply your staff. A little bit of automation, a little bit of remote access makes up for a lot of staff that otherwise would be sitting there 24/7 monitoring these things. And as I say, they haven't really, that's one detail that has not come out. The worker happened to be at the terminal and see the mouse moving around without, him doing anything. And since there were people that remotely logged in legitimately, he wasn't too alarmed by that. But the story that, the part of the story that remains to unfold is, how often was that monitor actually manned by someone looking at it? What was this just super lucky that they saw anything? Is it super lucky that they saw the mixture of the water being changed in a way that was toxic and were able to address it before it did any damage? Was that just lucky? Or was that staffed enough that it was most likely like you would need to know, oh, okay, for these 3 minutes, someone's on a bathroom break or something, and that's the time I'm going to attack? Would you need that level of knowledge, special knowledge, to be able to do something with this maliciously and predictably? Or was it just, well, most of the time it's open and it just got lucky that it got stopped? The other thing was, what kind of systems were in place to maybe automatically send an alarm to someone if they detected something being changed outside of certain parameters, or even at all. Maybe there's some things you're just not supposed to be changing. It'd be nice to monitor those. But as for the remote access itself, there are things you can do. And, I think go to that is a case where you'd want to consult a security professional and saying, okay, you set up, the private access at Intel or something, so you really know your stuff. Tell me what, as a small business or as an individual, I need to do to be able to set up a secure connection. I know a few of the answers. Like, some of the things you might do is have a reverse connection where it is actually the system. Well, first of all, have a firewall. I can't believe that there was no firewall. Pretty much every home with a NAT router, a little blue box giving you Wi-Fi, has at least a NAT firewall, a network address translation firewall. So just by its nature, it's designed to share a single connection with multiple machines, and to accomplish that, it has one address that it presents to the public. And if you have 5 machines and say machine, A wants to go out on the net, it goes through the NAT router, which takes off machine A's local IP address. It's not a real global IP address, but it's something that looks like an IP address, usually something like 10.0.0.1 or something like that. It's a network that doesn't mean anything on the outside. And it says, oh, okay, 10.0.0, well, and 1 is usually the router itself. So let's say 10.0.0.100 is machine A on the inside network. Well, as it goes through the network translator on its way out, it rewrites the from address on the kind of postcards that get sent across the internet to say what the IP of the house is instead of that specific machine. And then it also makes a note in a local table. I had an outgoing connection to this destination IP address, this web server, and machine A is the one that requested that. And so when the reply comes back to the generic home address, the local table lookup goes, oh, this is dilbert.com or something, and that was accessed by machine A, so I will rewrite the to address for the reply to the local internet address 10.0.0.100, and I'll put it on the inside network and fire it off, and then machine A gets its reply. And so the nature of this is machines on the inside can make connections outward, and the things that they're contacting can reply to those requests. But unsolicited connections from the outside basically fall apart at the NAT firewall, just as a side effect of, it's like, well, you're not in my lookup tables, so I don't know what machine inside you're trying to reach, therefore I'll just throw this packet away. And so you get sort of a little bit of firewall security by default. Now you can tell the thing, okay, I want to advertise to the outside world on the common address that if you go to such and such port number, say port 9090, just an arbitrary label that you throw on something to identify services, and say, oh, if you get any generic calls, even from things that I haven't contacted before, and they're looking for port 9090, go ahead and pass that through on to machine B, which is also listening on 9090. You can have that sort of thing. And that is almost, for the purposes of what we're talking about scanning, is the identical situation to having no firewall at all. So maybe that's what they're talking about. But what you can do is say, only this list of IP addresses, which are like home IP addresses for our employees, you can say, here's a specific list of IP addresses. If any of them try to get to 9090, go ahead and pass them through. Otherwise, do not. And so that would form one level of protection. Another one would be maybe a virtual network connection that was secured by some high-level cryptography. So you connect and say, okay, I want to do a open VPN connection, and here's my cryptographic credentials, and it says, oh, okay, that's good. And it connects you to the inside of the local network as if the firewall wasn't there, like you were another laptop in the office, for example. And then you could use these sorts of things. But really, that is kind of an example of the moat kind of security, where you have like a big security perimeter, and then once you're inside that perimeter, everything is trusted. So really the modern way of doing the security is by zones. So you might say, this network can come in and connect to this one machine and have access to this one set of functions that are appropriate for those employees, and then we're going to monitor it. And another thing is, when you have monitoring, you want to have those as write-only, otherwise offline systems, so that even if someone invades your system, they can't wipe out the logs of what they did because everything is logged. Like say, the physical manifestation with this would be, say you had a printer with an infinite supply of paper, and every time a connection came in, it printed something on that paper. Now, someone can hack your system all day long, but without physically entering your facility, they can't do anything about that paper log. It's printed, it's there. No computer can go back and erase something that's already been printed. So you can do the electronic equivalent of that, of systems that are not accessible except to receive certain bits of data and log them in a immutable way. So that is another aspect that you could use with this. But yeah, for this, I think another factor is a lot of times things that are very critical are also very invisible. People might think about the security on their credit card, but they're not often thinking about the security on their water filtration system. So taking a closer look at just kind of looking at all the inputs of our lives, which ones can cause problems and how much of a problem, and also look at how things working together can cause bigger problems. Like say, maybe you could alter the source of water you're drawing on in one system and who cares? But maybe you go from a well-secured water supply to a less secure water supply, and then you tamper with the less secure water supply on the basis of, we hardly ever use that, so it doesn't matter that it's not secure. Well, you combine those two things of being able to select which water supply you use and the one being not physically secure, and you could cause problems that way. So there's analogies to that all over security. And I think we've covered that well enough. All right, so next up, another clip from the good folks at twit.tv, Creative Commons. This is This Week in Google 598, Social Silos.
This is Twit.
Hey, speaking of Twitter, what the hell? What's going on with the Twitter? So Jack Dorsey...
exciting stuff.
Do you think? I think it's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's sensible or if he will even do it. This was part of Twitter's quarterly results analyst call, right? Or
Yep.
something like that.
Yep.
Okay. So Dorsey,
The second $1 billion quarter.
they had a good quarter.
Things are going well.
Yeah.
Yep. Though they warned that they've had a plateau, so growth won't be as high as it was, given Trump and COVID and everything else.
Yeah. This is the first earnings
Nonetheless, good
call
quarter.
after the Trump ban, and they did all right. They didn't meet the growth expectations Wall Street had, but I doubt they ever do. It's always been a problem.
The
Growth
stock
always,
went up anyway.
Yeah. They are going to add head count more than 20% this year. Overall expenses increasing 25%. This is MDAOs is the new number. We used to call DAOs, DAUs, daily active users, and there was MAUs, monthly active users. But MDAOs are monetizable daily active users. What does that mean? If they're not bots?
Oh, I see. Are they? Because didn't after they bought Review, aren't people thinking they're going to try to charge people for access
Yes.
to certain people's
Yes,
tweets?
but this number, which this is for current earnings.
So would that be like
that people
Jeff
who
is
see ads as opposed
monetizable,
to-
or is that people who pay for Jeff that's monetizable?
MDAOs, 192 million daily active users. That's below expectations. But the most important thing I think about this analyst call was what Jack Dorsey was talking about for the future of Twitter, including some interesting subscription revenue options. He's talked about paying for the algorithm. Jeff, you better explain that.
And an algorithm app store as well.
Yeah.
This is Blue Sky. So that the posting layer becomes the commodity. You make money by adding value, by having the algorithm that finds the things you want, by recommendation. I don't know, maybe fact checking. I'm not sure what all. But
there'd be more
there's a
than one,
layer
right? Because
on
it's a
top of that.
store, so you could say,
Exactly.
I'll have that, and that. It's a menu.
I'll have the Fox News view of the world, or I'll have the MSNBC view of the world, and I'll have it against not just Twitter, but one presumes some federated mishmash of various social platforms.
See, that's the thing
So
that
again,
really
that becomes
interested me.
commodity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the problem Twitter has. If they're going to make money with their MDAOs, they have to be the sole one and only source for all the tweets, a silo. But he's understood that that's really part of the problem with social media.
And it doesn't scale. I mean, it scales. He scaled. But it doesn't scale to the level that Wall Street expects or that he thinks is possible. There's more conversation to be had.
So Dorsey says decentralization could be the solution also to any Section 230 issues that might come from new laws.
Isn't
how
that
is
the
that?
point of Mastodon, though?
Yeah, that's
The whole
I think
decentralization?
yes. In fact,
Well, now you'd be a platform over both, I think, Ant.
No,
I'll
here's-
find you the best of Twitter and Mastodon.
yeah, here's how I interpret it. In fact, by the way, the creator of Mastodon, Eugen, is on the board of advisors talking to Dorsey about options. So clearly Dorsey understands. Mastodon is what we call a Fediverse. No, not feta cheese, Stacy. As delicious as that is. Although I like that so much, I've actually made it a part of our Fediverse at twit.social. But the idea is I run a server, you run a server, you. There's hundreds of servers out there. You join a server of your choice, maybe one that fits your worldview or your interests or just people you like. That's your local server. You can follow anybody because it's federated. That's what federated means. You can follow anybody on any of the other servers. And what Twitter is saying is, we'll set this up. There'll be a variety. And by the way, there's other things. There's things like Pixel Feed or Pixel Fed, which is an Instagram, pixelfed.social, based on the Fediverse. So it is identical to Instagram, but it's on the Fediverse, which is actually really kind of neat.
Interesting.
I can log into my PixelFed. I don't do Instagram anymore, as you know, but I do pixelfed.social. And that means I have two accounts, one on twit.social and one on pixelfed.social. I'm going to log in here somehow. Oh, here it is.
Looking.
And you can follow me on both. Oh, I got a two-factor on this. Wow, I really must have taken this seriously when I signed up.
Wow. Hey.
Jeez, I was afraid
Such
somebody
a good man.
choose
Two
my
factors.
So
would find
I
your
think
three
what
photos.
Dorsey is imagining is that Twitter would be one among equals. But that's not even the value that Twitter adds to the game. What Twitter really adds to the game is this algorithm, this curation. So they want to be the view into the Fediverse.
Or they're even what's interesting to me too, Leo, is they're even the curator of the curators. That there's an algo store.
Because of the store, right.
And that maybe Twitter runs that.
Right.
And Twitter has entries into the algo store, is my presumption, that it would have certain views from the social world that Twitter offers you, but others could too. It's just like WordPress.
But
WordPress is a commoditized
Right.
and open source at the software layer. It's at the value add layer where money's made.
Yeah, but honestly, the beauty of the Fediverse is you can do that. I could do that with Twit Social or whatever, but you don't control anything. And I think that would be critical to the whole enterprise. And I worry that Jack is going to have a different vision of what Twitter's role is in this. If it really supports the Fediverse, I think this is great. So this is another. So I should show twit.social too, actually.
He's got to bet that he can win at adding value.
Yeah, as a curator, okay.
Rather than at controlling, yes.
So this is twit.social. So it looks a lot like TweetDeck. By the way, that was another thing Dorsey floated. Maybe people will pay for TweetDeck. So this looks like a lot like TweetDeck. This is the home, which is the people I'm following and my notifications. This is the local timeline, which is everything on our server. And then this is a federated timeline, which is, this is a little complicated, everything that everybody on our server is following on all the other servers. Right now, Bloomberg's bot is spamming it with.
So it's like a graph, like a social graph kind of thing?
Yeah.
Your
That's a good way to put
graphs?
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Friends of friends, that kind of thing. There is a fire hose you could watch of all the stuff on all the federated servers, but it's quite a fire hose. So this is
Pretty picture of a flower.
isn't that pretty? So people do this, but then let me show you PixelFed, which looks
That
just like
flower's in the
Instagram.
news, actually.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that. It's not that flower, but another flower. This is
Another
what
purple flower.
this is.
See,
Just,
they all look alike to me.
this is just like Instagram, right? But
Yeah.
but it's also part of the Fediverse. So my handle on this can be followed on Mastodon as well as anywhere else. So I think that this
And
is
then people see they see these pictures, but they see it in the format that looks more like Twitter?
They
but it's
could,
Mastodon?
yeah. It's
Okay.
format independent, which is the beauty of it. But if you look at this, this looks just like an Instagram feed, doesn't it?
Sure does.
Yeah.
Yes. Like, why has an Instagram sued?
Like,
it looks that much
Suit
like.
exactly.
Okay, fine. Don't
No, I don't
sue them.
think. Can you wait? Can you? I don't think you can sue for a design. You can sue for a brand. You can sue
Yeah.
for content treatment of
Yeah.
content. A design, I don't think you can sue for.
I love it that this is
That's how H&M operates, right?
this is an open source
No,
federated
Okay.
Instagram. It doesn't have any of the issues that Instagram has because it's federated. Now, I'm using the Pixel Fed server, but I could use twit.social as well. So yeah, this is one view. This is one view, and this is another view, but it's all. And the conversations are very Twitter-like. Actually, you have 500 characters, which makes it a little better than Twitter, I think.
So you can really be wordy.
Jeff, you can sue for design under, I think, copyright and maybe some other things, but it's really, courts hate it and they tend to block them. So you can sue. It's just difficult
you
to
can.
get it.
Samsung, Apple sued Samsung over the
It's
look
a
and
big
feel.
deal in the fashion industry.
Yeah. Look and feel is a little nebulous, though. That's why courts don't like it. But a jury can rule. They can say, no, that's clearly a copy of the look and feel.
Yeah. Sorry.
So I think I hope that he's not just blowing smoke on this. I think this would be a
Well,
really.
I think he does that too, but
Yeah.
no, I think he's invested in this. He keeps coming back to it. I think he has a vision in his head of what this world could look like, and I think it's a way to. I mean, I was thinking about today, Leo, with the rundown. I wonder whether is there a world where Jack could suddenly leap over Mark?
That's interesting.
So by
in
doing
terms
something
of
like this
what-
would be
like,
a
how
way
would
to
you-
propel his
Because
reputation, is what you're
he's
saying?
no because what he sees is that he wants to connect to much more conversation, but find the good in that conversation. So Facebook is this closed universe, and what
Yeah.
Jack I think sees is back to internet roots, the value of being open, and you can scale much bigger, much faster. And he needs the formula to do that, and thinks this might be a formula. And then I think that Facebook gets left in the dust because it won't be federated, it won't be curated, it won't be seen. But your stuff
less
on
relevant.
Instagram and Fakeagram and Twitter and Mastodon and everywhere else will be seen through Uncle Jack.
Wouldn't it be interesting?
Okay, devil's advocate with
Yeah.
all of that openness and this just big expansion of everything coming out of the silos. Does that equate to even more misinformation out there?
I'm glad you asked. No, this is the beginning. Yes, and it's raw level, sure. The phone book has a lot of people in it you don't want to call. But I go back. I'm sorry about to do this to you. I'm sorry, but get your glasses ready, folks. If we go back to Gutenberg, what happened was that anybody could print anything. We had no institutions built around finding quality. It took about a century to come up with the institutions of the editor and the publisher and the critic and these ways that we found quality in this tremendous abundance that had not existed before. The library, the librarian. These were all institutions of quality that were needed to be created. Well, so now those institutions aren't up to the task of a conversational world. So we need to create new institutions, new features, new companies, new functions, new stuff to help us with that task. So yes, Ant, there'll be a lot more crap, but you'll have easier ways of ignoring it and people who will take you to the stuff that you want. Now, if you're smart, you won't just want the echo chamber. You'll want some view of the world. You want to see what's going on. You'll have brands that will emerge, like newspapers did, that will help you find the good stuff among all of the stuff, some of which is bad, but we just ignore the bad stuff. There's bad books on every bookshelf. So what? We don't care because I don't read them. I don't need them.
You could almost say that the silos are part of and I think this is what Jack is saying, the silos are part of the problem right now. So there's a pool of stuff on Twitter, there's a pool of stuff on Facebook, there's a pool of stuff on YouTube. You go to those places to see that pool of stuff, but what if you took away the walls and you had a much larger pool of stuff, and then the value that was added was not added by creating the silo, but was added on the top by filtering and finding the stuff that was best quality or most
the
interesting.
quality layer on top.
So it's just a different place to add the value to the equation.
Bingo.
And I think Dorsey's smart. And by the way, the answer to your question, Jeff, is Facebook becomes, instead of it leapfrogging over Facebook is another, if they're smart, becomes another part of this.
Or they close themselves off from it.
Well, they could.
Facebook says, no, Jack, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And then Facebook
I think
diminishes
they would do that at
power.
their detriment, right? So I think
but they may well do that.
They may. And I think what Jack's plan is, if we do this and we invite everybody to participate, that is of its own going to snowball. The network effect is all in our favor.
It's a new generation.
It's a new generation.
Ant, you were saying Ant?
I was going to say, but can't one argue that there's still a bit of openness because a lot of these posts are shared across multiple platforms because of just being on the internet. You can post something on Instagram and send that URL to Facebook, and it can be viewed there and commented on, and people can talk trash about it and say all kinds of things and stir things up, and then they can take that same URL and put it on Twitter and do the same thing, and they do it for TikTok, and so it's not.
Or another,
really
yes, you're right. Or another way is
closed.
Facebook can say, we're going to give you the Facebook algo across Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and Mastodon and so on. So that stuff can be wherever it is originated. But we can create something that goes across all of those. It doesn't matter where it originates. So it commodifies the origination and values the curation.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Google 598, Social Silos with Leo Laporte, Jeff Jarvis, Stacy Higginbotham, and A.N.T. Pruitt. So even though it is one of the biggest companies in the social space, from a social impact point of view, Twitter has famously had a hard time finding monetization that was proportional to that impact. So it was big news that they've had a couple of billion-dollar quarters, whereas, that's kind of what Facebook makes over lunch. So, they're looking for something new. This is a very interesting change in direction, possibly a very socially positive change in direction. As we've been saying a lot, one of the big problems, the source of a lot of the big problems, and they're like, let's attack Section 230, which is the pillar of the internet that says, hey, the person who actually makes the speech, the user who actually says something, is responsible for their own words, not Twitter or other big company or even small company. So Section 230 has been instrumental to new companies being able to enter the marketplace because, sure, once you're big like Facebook or even Twitter, you can afford some extra regulation thrown onto you or tax on 230 that limits or creates requirements that you have to fill before you can get the protection of Section 230. Well, new guys won't be able to do that. They won't have the budgets to do it. And really the reason it is a problem at the scale that they're operating at, that they have no liability and they just do whatever they want. The problem is their scale. If you had smaller companies, they wouldn't be able to, wag the dog as seems to be happening with Facebook, where, some decision that Facebook makes in how they route people around with their algorithms can radicalize a whole segment of the population by, directing some, you like UFOs? Okay, maybe you would also like to be part of an insurrection group. It's just, these people would not necessarily find each other and be encouraged to empower each other's delusions, sometimes violent delusions, without the algorithm. And, should they be responsible for that? Well, in some sense, yeah, but really anything you would do to quote unquote fix that would tend to do more damage than it solved problems. The problem is they're too big. And so this is sort of the direction that Jack Dorsey at Twitter has been thinking about, in a way to say, hey, we don't have to be this giant silo that has all the content on our site and everyone has to use our algorithm. We can say, well, let's have a bunch of algorithms. You can buy the one that you want, and that way we're not going to force, Nazism or white power on people that previously didn't have any interest in that, but the algorithm in some way effectively detected that they might be vulnerable to that kind of message. So in this case, you'd say, oh, well, I want interesting stuff about X, Y, and Z. And if you don't list white power, you're not going to get redirected to white power. I think that's a better way to go. It has a lot of potential. And so, as I say, finding a way to make money by their value add rather than being the sole walled garden that has all the content and basically owns all your friends, and so you can never leave. These federated systems where you have crosstalk between the systems can get away from that. So, a new thing rises with a new way of moderating things, but still allows you to talk to your old site. That could really be a solution. It was actually the way things used to work when Facebook came along and MySpace was the big player. They simply made a layer, they made their own interface to MySpace where it said, okay, well, we'll let you, just give us your MySpace credentials to Facebook, and on your behalf, we will go check your messages on MySpace and import them into Facebook. And so your friends that you left behind can still contact you and you can still contact them, except on every outgoing message, we're going to add a little message saying, hey, your friend is now on Facebook. Wouldn't you like to join too? You can bring all your friends list that you had from your old service to the new one. And we should be able to continue to do that. Of course, Facebook slammed the door behind them and made that against their terms of service to do that once they got big. But Federation could kind of put us back there where, we have those kinds of options again. And, you solve these problems by not allowing them to form in the first place. If your problem is, one person owning too much of the net and owning too much of our public discourse, and, to where we start saying, well, if this person mutes me, it's even worse than if the government mutes me, which is what the First Amendment covers, is that the government can't regulate your speech, except in very limited ways. But private parties can, because basically you're on their property when you're on their platform. And when they get to a scale where their property becomes what everyone is using to communicate with each other, then we need to do that. Obviously, that's a problem. You can't have society owned by this company or that company. And so you either have to regulate them, or you have to say, why are we letting them get so big in the first place where this is a problem? Maybe instead of regulating them to death and preventing any new competitors from ever coming along that can't handle the regulation, maybe we should just stop letting them buy up their competitors and, just not let them get so darn big. So this kind of addresses that by changing where they make money in a way that helps us all. So I think that's a good thing. And there was I love that Gutenberg analogy where it's like when the Gutenberg press came along, it's like, oh no, now anyone can make a book. How are we going to sort out the good stuff from the trash? Well, we created institutions to do it. We had, reputable publishers that says, okay, we'll put our name behind this and not behind that. You had librarians who would know the contents of the library. You'd have critics, literary critics that would say, oh, this is really good, kind of point out the few good pieces, the best pieces. So maybe the return of something like that for social media, and this could be the first step. That's a really exciting idea, having an algorithm store where you could shop between different ways of sorting this information in a way that's useful to you. So you could find, like, say, I want information that helps me be a smarter person and a happier person. I don't want to see all this it bleeds, it leads stuff all the time that makes me feel like everywhere on Earth is a hellscape with, Mad Max style fighting going on. When you believe that, you tend to make it happen. So can I just believe something better? Can I see stuff that's useful? Can I see stories of hope? Can I see things that encourage me and make me want to engage more instead of retreat into a shell and just leave the government to, the craziest people that want to engage with it? So this could be a very exciting idea. And, hey, if a value is being created, I don't mind paying for it. I just don't want some company to say they own my content and I can't have it back, or they own my friends and I can't, stay in touch with them if I move to a different service. So maybe Federation would address this. And with that, you've done it again. You spent an hour talking about technology and how a better understanding of it can lead to better outcomes at home, at work, and in your civic engagements. I hope you'll join us next week and every week, Wednesdays noon to 1 o'clock, for Northwest Tech Show.